All right, everybody, we are live. It is Jack Murphy. This is Jack Murphy Live. This is the Jack Murphy Live podcast. You can find me, Jack Murphy, on YouTube at Jack Murphy Live, on Twitter, Jack Murphy Live, the website, what do you know, jackmurphylive.com. The book is Democrat to Deplorable. Get that on Amazon. And if you're interested in our all men's community, check us out at liminal-order.com. My guest today is a repeat offender on the Jack Murphy Live podcast. It is Alam Bakari. He is the Breitbart News senior technology correspondent and author of the latest book, Deleted: Big Tech's Battle to Erase the Trump Movement and Steal the Election. Alam, how are you doing, sir? It's great to have you back on the podcast today.
Hey, Jack. Good to see you. Yeah, good to be back.
Likewise, I appreciate it. Thank you for making the time today. You have been working on these stories and in this field and on this beat for some time now. And since you are a repeat guest on Jack Murphy Live, we'll refer people back to that for the sort of personal backstory. But I do want to just sort of get caught up on how did you come to be so passionate or interested in this subject area? I know that the road for me to writing a book was a long one. It was personal. I had something I had to say. What was it? What was it for you that brought you to this subject, which is truly one of the most important things going on in the world today, especially for people like me, especially for people like you? Tell me, what was it that motivated you on this story and on this beat here?
Well, I'm a mid-millennial, so I grew up with the internet. The internet was my entire childhood and teenage years, and the internet, as I remember it, was, a very freewheeling, open place. You could go on the internet, speak your mind, and encounter very little censorship. This was the great technology of the millennial generation. It should have been a crowning technological achievement of mankind. Never before in human history were people able to simply just use, have a device, turn it on, and suddenly have access to a global audience. That was very new. That was an unprecedented level of free speech. But instead of celebrating it, the establishment has worked overtime for the past 5 years to take it away. And I saw that coming even before the Trump movement, even before the panic and the freak out in Silicon Valley over that. Much as you experienced, people trying to cancel you and ostracize you, Silicon Valley offers the greatest amount of power for the left to do that. We know the left today, they want to ostracize people, they want to cancel people who disagree with the narrative. And there's no better way to do that than getting them kicked off social media, which is increasingly essential to having a platform, to running a business, to running a political movement, to anything you can imagine. It's an awesome amount of power, and it's completely unregulated and uncontrolled. So that's why we're seeing what we're seeing. It's been such a tempting target for the left because it's so powerful.
Yeah, indeed. And you bring up a great point. The social media platforms aren't just about talking about your cats or sharing pictures of your friends or even just spewing whatever political nonsense you want to spew. More and more, there's no even distinction between business or online business, or life and online life, or organizing in real life or organizing online. It is 100% essential to have access to these services in order to pretty much do anything these days. If you're not online, you're basically zero. You're basically dead. And that is the way that some people feel when they get canceled. I'll tell you, when Twitter had its bug, had its glitch or whatever, its attack just like 3 or 4 days ago, and the whole thing was down, I was on the website and I'm trying to type in a tweet and it says, oops, something went wrong. Oops, something went wrong. Check my notifications, no notifications, nothing in my feed. And I'm like, well, this is how it ends, huh? Just like silence. You have no access, no nothing. I thought I had got at that point. It took a few minutes, and I'll tell you, the feeling that I had was not a good one, man. It was like a pit in my stomach, and it's like,
yeah, you're not the only one. I got a call from a friend that same day, wondering, oh no, have I been yeeted from social media? Is this the end?
right.
So just shows you how much we depend on these platforms and how they can just take it away at the drop of a hat with a push of a button. There's actually there's a chapter in this book, the one on Facebook, that talks about how there was this website called Little Things, not a political website. It was apolitical. It was all about viral pictures of cats and other family-friendly internet content. Did very well by using Facebook to disseminate its content. Had 100 employees. Facebook comes along and makes an algorithm change, targeted at the right, by the way, in I believe 2018, start of 2018, and immediately that website goes essentially bankrupt, defunct, had to fire all their employees and shut down. And Facebook gave them no warning; they just suddenly changed their algorithm. So this is the position that even a lot of non-political businesses are in right now. It's totally crazy. I mean, physical landlords aren't allowed to do this. A physical landlord can't throw you out of your storefront because they don't like what you're saying about politics. You could sue them if they did, but online businesses have no recourse and no due process at all. I try and make this point as often as possible because it goes beyond politics. Everyone is at the mercy of these tech giants, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, or not even political at all.
Yeah, even if your business is just selling cat toys or whatever, you have to be online. You have to have access to people. You have to be able to communicate. And I think that this brings up one of the more overarching discussions in your book, and all about social media censorship and the tech sort of dark night that is being brought upon us, is that, when social media started, when Twitter started, it was just 140 characters, little text messages, people chatting with each other. But it's become so much more than that. And it's through its market power has evolved into being a different sort of entity than just your private chat channel. Can you describe and maybe use the analogy you used in the book about sort of FedEx shipping your packages, etc.? Like, I thought that was a really great way to understand what's happened here.
Yeah, so I open the book, as you say, by asking the reader to imagine themselves in the 1960s, before the internet. Suddenly your typewriter stops working because you're posting hate speech. Your phone line cuts you off, and the postal service refuses to carry your mail. It sounds bizarre, but that's the world we're currently living in with these tech giants. They're doing exactly the same thing. And look at the example of Gab. I talk about this in the book as well. Gab simply wanted to do what Twitter was doing in 2008, 2009, when it had basically no restrictions on legal, constitutionally protected speech. They even allowed the Arab Spring to encourage a violent uprising across the Middle East. So this was an open, free platform. Gab wanted to do the same thing, but in the present day, in the current year, that's not allowed. So what happened was the Google App Store kicked them off, the Apple App Store kicked them off. And you've got to remember, Google and Apple control 99% of all smartphone operating systems worldwide. So that's the entire smartphone market. You can still technically get on Google phones, through a very complicated process, downloading apps through your browser and so forth, beyond the technical ability of casual users. But that's effectively excluding them from all smartphones. So that's what happens when you try and create a competitor to these platforms. It's like if you try to create a competitor to the postal service, and the road said, okay, your postal trucks aren't allowed. We're only going to allow the mailing service that bans hate speech. That's essentially what's going on with the app stores. So it's a totally bizarre situation when you compare it to previous forms of communications, whether it's the post, phones, or typewriters. We're in a situation where the primary means of communications can be cut off from us at a moment's notice if the owners of the platforms don't like what we say.
Yeah, and it didn't start off like this, right? It started off as something new and fresh and something on the fringe for edge users and first movers, early adopters, etc. It started off fun, and then things evolved, and it became people understood the power of it, and then it became more powerful itself. And so the services that they offer have actually gone through a transformation in both their intent, their execution, and their impact on the world. And because of that, has the way that our government should view them, is the way that we as citizens should view these social media companies, these tech companies, has it changed? Has their status changed? I'm sort of teeing you up here to talk about Section 230. I honestly don't have a strong grasp on what all that means precisely. So maybe you could help us understand a little bit about that, because we have to have a change of perspective on the social media companies in order for us to affect the change that we need in order to protect everybody, right? So what is Section 230? What protections do they have right now? How can they go about doing this stuff? Is there anything on the horizon that could change that? Help us understand what that means.
Okay, well, I'll make this one point. This is not a partisan point. This is the honest truth. There's literally only one powerful politician in the country today who could actually do something about big tech and is doing something about big tech, that's Donald Trump. The establishment Republicans are doing nothing. The Democrats don't want to do anything. In fact, the Democrats want to use their power to push for even more censorship. They've said so again and again. Biden said that. The only person doing something is Donald Trump. He passed an executive order on the subject. We saw the FCC chairman, Ajit Pai, when the New York Post thing happened last week, saying, okay, we're going to look at rulemaking changes for Section 230. That happened because Donald Trump passed his executive order. Pai was responding to a petition drafted by someone called Adam Kandeyev, who's a free speech law professor who actually sued Twitter in free speech cases in the past. In the Meghan Murphy case, actually, you might be familiar with that. He was appointed to the administration by Donald Trump. He then drafted that petition that went before the FCC that allowed Ajit Pai to make that statement. Donald Trump's also sounding like a surrogate here, but this is like literally the only positive thing that's happening at the moment. He also, nominated Nathan Symington to the FCC, someone who's very good on the social media censorship issue, or so I hear. Just compare that for a moment to the establishment Republicans. Today, they announce they're actually not going to subpoena Jack Dorsey, not because the Democrats don't want to, but because a few Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee were wavering. So Twitter literally censored America's oldest newspaper, the New York Post, a newspaper founded by Alexander Hamilton. They can't even muster the political unity to subpoena Jack Dorsey. The New York Post, by the way, is still locked out of their Twitter account as we speak. They've been locked out for 5 days, and we are less than 2 weeks from the election. This is insane. This is obvious election interference, and this has been we've known about what they're doing for 5 years now. I've caught them red-handed on so many occasions. I can't even count the number of leaks from Google and Facebook exposing censorship that are published in Breitbart News. We know about this, and the Republicans still can't even subpoena Jack Dorsey. So honestly, the only person at the moment you can rely on to do something about this is Donald Trump.
Before we go past that, I want to use this opportunity as a chance to point something out. I'm often talking here about networks and emergent networks and network politics and network tribalism. And then we just see that there are these various groups. We've got the BLM Antifa groups. We've got the corporations, the establishment, the insurgency, which is the Trump MAGA movement, because that is an insurgent movement against both the establishment GOP and the Democrats, the uniparty, the corporate uniparty cabal. And I tell people that BLM Antifa and the corporations have alignment right now. And people are like, how is that even possible? And the reason is this: the establishment Republicans and the Democrats are so afraid or don't wanna or so in the pockets of the corporations that they are not taking any serious action on antitrust, on corporate collusion, on price fixing, on market manipulation, on censorship, on any of these matters. And because of that, there is now an alignment between BLM Antifa and the corporations that you can see obviously every day when the corporations not only send money to Black Lives Matter, they hang their banners over their buildings, they do advertising and messaging for BLM and donate billions of dollars, et cetera, et cetera. And in talking to Matt Stoller and reading Matt Stoller's book Goliath, it becomes all very perfectly clear that the corporate party, the uniparty, the establishment GOP, and the Democrats are in cahoots with the corporations, and they're all on one side, whereas the insurgent MAGA Trump movement is the only one trying to fight any of this stuff. And when you say that Trump is the only one doing anything, you're absolutely right. But I will say, my criticism, Trump, this might be a little too late. We should have done this 2 years ago. The election has been impacted by his inaction, which I don't understand. And I'm glad that things are moving now, but I wanted them to move more quickly with more force and more direction. But it's very difficult. The forces are very entrenched. The money is very big. The committees are co-opted, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a point for my listeners, longtime listeners, so you can really understand that. So what are we doing right now? Go for it, Olam.
Okay, I just want to take a massive tangent based on what you just said. First of all, I totally understand what you just said. Why was there so much inaction? That was very frustrating in the early years of the Trump movement, Trump administration, and that was because the federal bureaucracy was totally co-opted. And to be fair, the personnel office, which is the crucial office at the White House that determines staffing in the federal bureaucracy, that should have been staffed with a Trumper from day one. Instead, it was staffed by an establishment Republican. That only changed at the start of this year with the appointment of John McEntee. That staffing change was critical because that's allowed the administration to finally get the right people in those posts to take action on the issue. But I just want to take a tangent based on what you just said, because it ties to something I saw the other day on Twitter, which was very interesting. Someone comparing the present situation of the American Republic, the American Republic, to the late Roman Republic. And this is a comparison that's made a lot by sort of people who think America is in decline, that American democracy is in decline, that you've got a similar situation where the Senate, the representative body, is completely co-opted by special interests, doesn't work for the people, and increasingly the only body that the people can rely on to represent their interests is the executive branch. So it's almost like, if we want social media to serve the people and not serve special interests and not just censor everyone and delete people's livelihoods, you have to turn to the executive branch. You have to give more power to the executive branch, which of course, so you can see the analogy to Rome there, increasingly powerful executive, increasingly corrupt and hated legislature. So moving away from the representative democracy and more to like an imperial executive. But that's really what we're seeing with the tech issue. The tech giants have completely co-opted Washington, D.C. They've flooded both Republicans and Democrats with money. They're the biggest lobbying spenders. Now, there's actually a whole chapter in Deleted on this in the book. When Silicon Valley met Washington, D.C., they've completely taken over establishment conservative think tanks, completely taken over Congress. That's why it's so difficult to get anything through Congress. That's why the executive branch, which is the least affected by lobbying spending, I think at the moment anyway, is the only body that's really taking serious action on this.
Yeah.
But it's a historical analogy there, I thought.
Yeah, it's a great analogy, and it's important for people to understand. Yeah, we're being critical of Trump, but also remember this: Donald Trump was a weapon. He was a high-speed weapon, a maneuver weapon that moved quickly, was an insurgent, got behind enemy lines pretty much, and then took over. And so because he was like an expeditionary force, he was out there all by himself, and he wasn't dragging a massive operation with him. He wasn't dragging a huge bureaucracy with him. We haven't even gotten to this sort of, for a lack of a better analogy, we haven't gotten to the nation building stage yet of this takeover, right? And it's taking time. Like, first you get into office, you have to learn how to do the office. No one has ever been president before. When they become president, you got to figure that out. And especially when you're an outsider, you're coming in basically to enemy territory. I interviewed Amanda Milius last night, and we talked all about the plot against the president. I mean, not only did he come without an established bureaucracy with him, but he came into a hostile environment where everybody was trying to take him out, and everybody was trying to ruin the administration and chop them off at the feet and then hang them in front of everybody. And so we're seeing now, like, as you learn how to run the country and learn how to do bureaucracy and institution building, we're seeing evidence that is growing and getting a little bit more powerful. So yes, there's a criticism, but also there's just the reality of what was happening. And hopefully in term 2, we will see some more of this institution building and more of a takeover of these deep state entities, basically, that are controlling the entire conversation. So
if there's any future presidents listening to this show, the crucial office is called the Personnel Office, the White House PPO. You control that, you control the bureaucracy. That's what Trump did not do at the start, but he has done so now. There's a Trump loyalist there. But yeah, that's the critical office. If you don't control personnel, you don't control policy.
Right. Yeah. Personnel is policy. Policy is personnel. I don't know. There's a cliche in there somewhere. So let's talk a little bit about 230. I don't know. Do you feel like you can explain that to me? Because
absolutely,
there's so many people competing and yapping on both sides. Libertarians say it's this thing over here. Democrats say this. I don't think most people have any freaking clue what it really means. So let's talk about that for a minute. What is social media? Is it a utility? What is 230? Are they publications? Are they produced? Like, what is it? Tell us what it is.
So here's the issue with social media platforms, or indeed any online, like a search engine as well. In order to host, all the websites on Google, or in order to host all the videos of YouTube, or all the posts on Twitter and Facebook or Instagram or any of these platforms, it's impossible for social media platforms to be legally liable. So if you could sue Twitter for posts people make on Twitter, Twitter's business model would not be viable. So they need a special law called Section 230 that renders them immune from those lawsuits. It also renders them immune, and I think this was never really necessary for the platforms in the same way that the first legal immunity was. They're also immune from lawsuits under that law for taking down content. So I kind of understand why they'd need to be immune from lawsuits arising from, defamation or illegal content even posted by their users, because, how do you police millions and billions of posts? You got to hold the users liable for those, not the platforms. Otherwise, you can't have the platforms. But I don't see why they should be immune from lawsuits around taking down content, because they don't have to take down any legal constitutionally protected content when you think about it. They could just give users the ability to filter on their own. And Google has done this. Google has a button. It's had a button for, I think, decades now, Safe Search. You can turn that button on if you want to filter out obscene search results from Google. And that's up to the user. It's not up to Google. You decide whether you want to turn that button on or off. They could very easily provide a similar button for so-called hate speech or so-called misinformation, so-called fake news, all the other categories they've invented to filter legal constitutionally protected speech. They could turn that over to the users, give them a similar button to turn on or off. The reason why they haven't is because they care more about political power today than they care about consumer choice. And, my sources in Facebook and Google who've spoken me to the book, spoken to me for the book, they say that the story was the same in every single company, in every single tech giant, Google, Facebook, Twitter, complete panic after the Trump election. What do we do about it? How did we let this happen? And an immediate focus on things like misinformation and disinformation and all the initiatives they set up right after the election, by the way. It's very obvious what they're doing. This is all right after the election. To curtail the Trump movement. But to go back to Section 230, I went on a tangent there, but to go back to Section 230, if you say that a platform has to behave in a certain way in order to be a platform, what you can do is basically you're telling these tech companies that if you don't adhere to the standards of being a platform, like remaining politically neutral or allowing users to opt out of any filter you create, that's, I think, a standard that should be applied across the industry by law. If you don't do that, then you lose your legal immunity, because without that legal immunity, they can't operate as platforms. Their business model falls apart. And many libertarians and free speech defenders will come in and say, well, look, these companies, they have First Amendment rights like everyone else. Therefore, they should be allowed to take down whatever they want, censor whoever they want. But here's the thing. Yes, every company does have a First Amendment right, but not every company has these special legal immunities. So it's very reasonable to say that if you want these special privileges that no other type of company gets, then you have to behave in a certain way. You have to be the type of company you say you are. Otherwise, you're not getting the legal immunities that are for those specific types of companies. So when you have a platform censoring and editing, the argument is that platform should be considered a publisher. They should be liable for all the content posted by their users. I think when you make that clear in the law, or when the FCC gets involved and does a rulemaking change, you have to say, if you're filtering legal content, constitutionally protected content on behalf of your users, and not simply giving them the option to filter that content themselves, then you are no longer a platform, then you don't get Section 230 protections. I think that will go a long way to fixing the issue.
Yeah, what's interesting about this is that people are like, oh, we don't want more regulation. Oh, free speech shouldn't be regulated, whatever. But there's actually more than one kind of regulation. There's regulation of the companies, but then there's sort of like regulation of the laws. And in this case, we're already regulating the laws by offering them up a special immunity. It's very similar to the antitrust exemption that professional sports league gets, which opened them up to actual, that's regulating the government, but it actually opens them up to a little bit of regulation themselves. And in this case, they're already being regulated. This market is already being regulated. There's already special rules in place to allow the market to exist. Adding a couple more isn't like changing the playing field altogether. It's just refining the process that's already in place, because this is a new thing. Like social media is a new thing. This is a unforeseen technology. It has unforeseen power. It holds a special place in American culture, economics, society, politics, technology, everything. And because of that, there should be a little extra oversight, and we haven't gotten it in the right direction. In fact, all of the sort of oversight over the speech and such has been coming from the social media companies themselves. And you alluded to it just now in terms of the panic, and this is where I want to like kick off, sort of going, talking about the arguments in the book. you know it wasn't like this really in 2014, right? I mean, it was the Wild West. It was the Wild West out there. There's no question about it. Even in 2015, even in 2016. But then the election happened, and talk us about the panic, right? The panic that took over all of social media, Silicon Valley technology. What happened in 2016? We know the answer, but how did they react and what did they do?
So there's a chapter in the book called "The Panic," and it explains that when you're trying to censor something, especially the internet, which was created as this kind of anti-censorship ideal, a lot of people believed in that, especially in Silicon Valley. You've got to create a kind of moral panic first. In order to control something, first you have to get enough support from society, from the public to control what you're trying to control, and that's what they did with the internet. So many ways that they did this. The Russian disinformation, the Russian propaganda element, the idea that social media is corrupting us, it's making us so-called hyper-partisan, that is leading to the breakdown of society. They even blamed Facebook for causing genocides and racial killings in Southeast Asia. So you name it, they were throwing everything at these social media companies, saying that. And the underlying message was, if you allow an open, free internet, if you don't take control of your platforms, if you don't take responsibility, they love that word. They love calling the Silicon Valley CEOs irresponsible for not censoring their platforms. If you don't do that, then you're literally causing genocide. That was the argument they made. And the thing I get into in the book, which is so interesting, I think, and what I found maybe the most interesting as I was researching the book, is that this has happened so many times before. With every advance in communications technology, every time throughout history where more power to communicate and spread your message has sort of devolved down from elites to the masses, every time there's been a similar panic. So at the end of the 19th century, when literacy was just happening, when there was suddenly mass literacy in Europe, when the costs of printing were going down, when there was the rise of the telegraph, we saw the rise of all these new popular forms of newspapers. There were newspapers before that, but they were all targeted at the elite, because in many cases across Europe, the elite class was the only class that could read. This completely changed at the end of the 19th century. And as soon as we get these new mediums, popular newspapers, popular literature, mass market literature, there was a panic alongside that came along with it. They called the new newspapers yellow journalism. That was the fake news term of the day, the disinformation term of the day. They call it yellow journalism. And most amusingly, they called Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst, who are titans of the news industry. You couldn't get more respected names today. They called them purveyors of yellow journalism because they were publishing newspapers for the masses rather than newspapers for the elites. So every time throughout history this has happened. It happened with TV as well. They said TV is causing violence. It's leading to the erosion of democracy because people aren't getting involved. They aren't getting interactive. They're just staring at their screens. That was the argument in the post-war period. Funnily enough, the argument with social media is now the complete opposite. They're arguing we're too interactive, we're getting hyper-partisan, we're getting too involved. So it's like you can't win. But the general message of that chapter is that whenever there's a new communications medium, or whenever there's the more ability for more communication for the masses and not elites, there's always a panic that goes along with it. And I think this panic over social media is the biggest one of all, because elites have seen that this particular medium threatens them in a way that even the expansion of mass market newspapers didn't, even the way that TV didn't. In fact, TV was kind of helpful for the elites because it put power in the hands of a few ultra wealthy executives who could afford to have big studios. Social media is the opposite. All you need is a laptop to access a global audience.
Yeah, what's interesting is always about power, right? This is always about power. It's about the elites trying to hold on to their power in this case, right?
It's always about power, and I think maybe the most scary quote in the book. There's lots of quotes from Silicon Valley insiders that are very scary. We can get into those, how much of the censorship is invisible. But an even scarier quote, I think, came from a guy who I talked to inside the government, and he's been following social media censorship for a long time. And the way he put it was, Western elites actually supported online free speech throughout the Obama years, in the early rise of social media, because the way they saw it, social media was a very useful tool for destabilizing and regime changing countries abroad that they didn't like, whether it was Arab dictatorships or Eastern European governments. They saw social media as a kind of weapon to spread their influence. But he said, with the rise of Brexit, with the rise of Donald Trump, with the rise of all these movements that came out of nowhere and took the establishment in the West completely by surprise, he said they panicked and suddenly realized that the same tools used to destabilize and regime change abroad could regime change the establishment here at home. Interestingly, today you'll see the most strident and organized and relentless force pushing for internet censorship is not even the left. Obviously, they're very much in favor of it, but it's all these sort of foreign policy NGOs that have set up these disinformation campaigns. Darren Beattie talks about this, the whole color revolutions establishment. Just the other day at Breitbart News, published an article about the German Marshall Fund. The German Marshall Fund's main areas of focus are, Eastern Europe, Ukraine, Black Sea, all of these areas that are very have a very high focus for the Western foreign policy establishment, but they're also doing stuff on disinformation, and they just published a report saying that social media platforms should apply friction, which is their word for suppress, Fox News, Breitbart News, all of conservative media, basically for being deceptive. So foreign policy elites, who, by the way, span, as we were saying earlier, span both parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, they're the establishment. They are really the most relentless force pushing for social media censorship at the moment.
There is an argument to be made that social media is destabilizing. So in the old days, in the days of the Blue Church, we had top-down information distribution. We had Walter Cronkite telling everybody what to believe while they were eating dinner. He was at the desk teaching us all. The universities, we have teachers at the front of the classroom teaching the masses what to believe and what to think. And what we've seen now, that built a social cohesion. It really did. We were all sort of pulling on the same rope, as it were, to steal a cliche from baseball. But then social media comes, and now we've had sort of an explosion. I've called it like a big bang explosion, actually, where everything has just been spit out into the universe, and now certain areas are picking up gravity and attracting more mass and attracting more power. And what that means is that instead of one story for us all to believe, there's now a million stories for a million different people to believe. And that does actually have an inherently destabilizing effect on national cohesion. And it does provide the sort of the petri dish in which, network tribalism can arise. Now, is that in and of itself something worth stopping? No. I mean, that is us, sort of using the market to come to our a market, decided version of truth or reality or good or bad or right or wrong. And it does allow for voices that, until now, voices that had been silenced to have a voice. It's given an opportunity for somebody like me to reach an audience of tens of thousands, sometimes millions of people, to get this information out there. But I do see from the other side their argument that they need, from their personal viewpoint, how they need to maintain power, and that's what they want to do. So they're scaring the bejesus out of all of us. There's a moral panic, just as there's been going all the way back to the printing press and everything else. And they're using it to scare us so that they can take more control and more power over ourselves.
Yeah. Actually, just briefly, I don't think it's like a conspiracy that they're planning this. I think they themselves are legitimately terrified, which is why everything they're saying sounds terrified and seems intended to scare us. It's because they're terrified, because they're losing their power, they're losing their control over information. They're seeing all these unusual movements they didn't expect rise up to challenge them. And all these movements say, we hate the elites, we want to get rid of the elites. Well, these guys are the elites, so they would be scared.
Right, exactly right. And so they've taken the social media power, they've turned it into a moral panic, they've amplified the moral panic. They're using it to censor and control people. The Trump election scared the hell out of all these people. You broke an amazing story a couple years ago where we had live video recording of like a company-wide meeting with the head C-level executives at Google basically crying up on stage saying that the Trump election was the worst thing that they ever saw. They're going to do everything that they can do to stop it and to prevent it from happening again. And I do believe, another tangent here, that sentiment of like, we have to stop this and or we have to never let it happen again, that sentiment is just burbling underneath all the Democrats, all the left right now, and they're chomping at the bit to get elected, to get into power so that they can begin a truth and reconciliation period, which is really code for like lies and capitulation and torture and torment and exile. They're going to come after everybody so that they can, in their words, make sure this doesn't happen again. So it's something that we need to be really worried about. And I'm happy to see at least Trump taking some action now that may hopefully even extend after this term. But again, we would have liked to see a little bit more, a little bit sooner. One personal story I have and relates to this, and we're going to talk about how they cover things up through overt versus covert actions. One thing that happened to me a few months ago, and it happened to Breitbart and Federalist and a bunch of other people at the same time. I was just doing a regular name search for my website just to check, see how the standings were and where I was ranking. And usually I type in Jack Murphy Live into Google. All of my stuff comes up right at the top, all of my articles, jackmurphylive.com, all that. But this time, man, literally nothing from my website came up. Even when I searched quotes, jackmurphylive.com, quote, nothing from my website came up. So I contacted my tech guy, and he's been on web doing SEO and search and stuff for 2 decades. So he knows what's up. We're digging into it. We're looking at it. We're searching. We're looking. We're comparing it to Bing, where all my stuff comes up in Bing, no problem. And as we're doing the tests, the next search we do, one search, there's nothing. The next search we do, it's all back. It's all back. Like a switch flipped, like they turned it back on, like it was a test run or something. And I go onto Twitter and I'm like, hey, I'm being censored. And then all of a sudden that afternoon, boom, Breitbart, Federalist, everybody saying the same exact thing. So let's talk about that. Is that covert or is that overt? And then let's lead this into the covert versus overt discussion. Do you know about that? I think you
Well, I
do.
think it's semi-covert because not something that they announced, not something they told people about. So it's almost like they were hoping people wouldn't notice. Obviously, you noticed, Breitbart News noticed. We did a big story about this back in July, showing I think it was 99% reduction in visibility for Breitbart News links since compared to 2016. So it was like they turned off. They obviously flipped the switch.
Yep.
And again, we had SEO experts looking at this and telling us how it was all going down, and that was 99% on the world's largest search engine, by the way. The search engine that itself controls 90% of all searches worldwide. So yeah, as to whether it's covert or overt, it's not as covert as some of the things Silicon Valley is doing, but it's only covert it's only overt if you notice it. So
Right.
I wonder how long this was going on before people noticed.
Right, exactly right. And then the switch flipped and then everything was back. And so let's talk about this. There's the panic, they're covering things up, and they use 2 different avenues. They use overt versus covert. Let's get an example of what's overt and an example of what's covert. The covert shit might even be the scariest part of all the stuff about Dr. Epstein. We can talk about that. So, what are they doing? What is covert versus overt? How are they deleting us?
So there are a few concepts that need to be understood here to really understand the covert censorship. So there's a chapter in the book, chapter 6, that talks about how algorithms are used to censor. And every Silicon Valley platform, whether it's Google, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, you name it, what determines what appears at the top of your feed? Obviously, they have to sort through millions and millions of information. What determines that is a type of score. Every platform uses a what's called some of the platforms call it a quality ranking. Other platforms use different terminology, but everything you post is given a numerical value that determine where you are on the pecking order, that determine whether you're going to appear at the top of people's Facebook feeds, or whether you're never going to be seen there at all, whether you're on page 1 of Google or page 100 of Google, where people will never find you. I think 90% of people don't go beyond the first page of Google. It's maybe 90%, maybe 70%. It's a very high number. So that's determined by a numerical value. And it used to be the case that the criteria used to give your content that score was pretty objective. So by objective, I mean, not politically motivated in any way, but things like, are you posting malware? Are you posting websites with viruses or illegal content? Is your content relevant? Is it timely? Is it popular? Are lots of people sharing it? Those are the things that you use to determine what would go at the top of your feed. And also they use, data as well. These companies basically spy on everyone to find out what their interests are. So the algorithms will also ask, well, is this relevant to that particular user's interests? And that determines what's going to go at the top of your feed. So say you're a huge baseball fan, if they find a really popular post about baseball, they're not going to send that to a football fan, but they might put it at the top of a baseball fan's feed. So pretty non-political criteria, but obviously ever since 2016, and my sources who work for the companies say this, and the companies themselves say it openly, they're introducing all sorts of new criteria, like disinformation. Is the website or the account posting disinformation? Is it posting hate speech, conspiracy theories? Is the link authoritative? Does it come from an authoritative source? What is authoritative? What's non-authoritative? These are the type of things they're now training their algorithms to recognize, and that will now go into your quality ranking or whatever else they call these secret scores. You can't see your score; it's completely hidden from you, by the way. It's basically Silicon Valley's social credit score, because while it used to be determined by non-political criteria, it now essentially what it does is ranks you based on conformity to Silicon Valley's values. And how is it any different from what China is doing? It's not different at all. Two other concepts that people need to understand are network analysis and language analysis. Language analysis, pretty straightforward. It's how machines recognize language. So training an algorithm to recognize hate speech, that's language analysis. But to train an algorithm to recognize hate speech, you have to give it a bunch of data and say, this is hate speech, this isn't hate speech, and that's how you train it to make more accurate judgments. In fact, Facebook this summer was running a competition for programmers. I think the reward was something like $100,000 for the best algorithm that recognizes hate memes. So recognize when an image is spreading so-called hate speech. They had a whole competition for that. So they're very clearly out in the open training their algorithm how to recognize this kind of stuff. Obviously, they're not being very transparent about it. So I would love to see what kind of data Facebook uses or Twitter uses to train its algorithm to recognize hate speech. So that's the language analysis side. Then there's the network analysis side, which is potentially even scarier. Network analysis doesn't look at the content of what's being posted. It looks at connections. Who's following who's linking to who's retweeting who, et cetera, That's how Silicon Valley identifies entire networks. So again, baseball fans, they look at who's following the big baseball accounts, who's tweeting about baseball, and they use that to create a model of an entire network. You can imagine how they're doing that with hate speech. So say Facebook bans a right-winger, say they ban Laura Loomer, Paul Joseph Watson, people like that. That's not the end of the story. People think the bans that you can see in front of you are the end of the story. They're not. That also sends a message to the algorithm. All of these millions of accounts on Facebook, we may not ban them, but they were following an account known for posting hate speech. They're sharing links to InfoWars, known for posting disinformation, conspiracy theories. Then the language analysis will kick in. Well, they're saying hashtag MAGA. They're saying all sorts of words that other accounts known for posting hate speech post as well. So while they may not be in violation of our hate speech policies, we should probably turn their quality ranking down. So the really scary thing that these Silicon Valley companies can do is they have the ability to censor and suppress entire political movements, entire networks, millions of people at the same time. And the algorithms, they can do it automatically. Now, have I seen exactly how this all works? No, it is what people inside Silicon Valley are telling me. It's what people inside who work for Twitter, Facebook, and Google are telling me. We know they have the ability. You can Google network analysis. It's a mainstream field. All the tech platforms use it. We know they have the ability and they have the motive, and there's no oversight, no law stopping them from using it. So why on earth wouldn't they use it? They have every reason to and no reason not to.
Right. And this is because the social media companies are following the mission of political mission, their moral mission, their values, their own values. And they actually, and this is the really scary part, is they actually program the algorithms with their political values. And in today's world, when our political tribes aren't merely just sort of fellow travelers with different opinions on policy or interest rates or tax policy or whatever, our tribes have been divided now by moral compass, by religious fervor, by evil and good and dark versus light. And it's very clear that everyone on the left believes that everyone on the right are not just incorrect with their policy prescriptions, but actually bad human beings that don't deserve fair treatment, that don't deserve a say, that don't deserve a conversation. Just think, listeners, like how often your own family members will just block you on Facebook or forget about you because you voted for Trump. There is a moral war happening, and it's now embedded in the algorithms, in the technology, in the programming. And if we don't do something about it now, in the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years, if some party, the left, if they get total control of the government and of our institutions, and then the algorithms themselves, there's going to come a moment at which John Robb calls this the dark night, or the long night, where the first mover advantage in technology, the monopoly power around search and the algorithms and social media becomes impenetrable. It's something you will not be able to escape from. It is a long and perpetual darkness that will be cast upon this country and the entire world and every citizen that's in it. We will not be able to speak to each other, conduct financial transactions, even just send each other simple messages, much less do any activism or any resistance, to use their term, whatsoever. And so the urgency around this issue couldn't be more dire. It couldn't be more severe. This is the time at which we need to do something about it, because this is the time at which something can still be done. It really scares the crap out of me to think that somebody who believes I am immoral because I believe in the equality of opportunity rather than the equality of outcome is going to be able to program me out of existence. I mean, I experience it. I'm shadow banned. I can tell when the algorithm has me locked down or when it has me let free. I know that I'm not being seen. I'm being muted. It happens everywhere, and it happens in search results. It happens in social media. It happens on Twitter. But we persist. We persist today because we must, because this is going to get worse. So now
Just briefly on the long night thing, I'll tell you one thing that's possibly even scarier than that. It'll all be invisible. We won't even know that certain things are being suppressed. Keep in mind, these tech platforms know everything about us. They know what goes viral. They're experts in what goes viral. So they not only do they worry about these tech platforms suppressing the current Trump movement as it exists today, but what new movements are they suppressing before they even gain momentum? Do we even know? We don't know. They could be nipping movements in the bud because a language analysis has detected a threat to their values, and we wouldn't even know about it. That's insane to me. And you also mentioned the two tribes. I think this will happen to the anti-establishment left as well. There's a little bit about this in the book as well. Facebook is advised by the Atlantic Council. The Atlantic Council is a neoconservative, pro-war, pro-intervention think tank. That certainly we can both remember when the anti-establishment left and the anti-establishment right, that was the big divide over the Iraq War. If Facebook had been around during the Iraq War, do you think they would have suppressed the anti-establishment left? Well, they're being advised by the Atlantic Council. The Atlantic Council probably would have told them to. So I think if Bernie Sanders supporters and anti-establishment left-wingers think this power won't be used against them, I think it almost certainly will be.
Yeah, and I think that is why there is some common resonance with some Bernie supporters and Trump supporters. In my book, Democrats are Deplorable, I interviewed and profiled a couple of Bernie supporters who ended up voting for Trump and who, by the way, are not returning to the Democratic Party. But there was an anti-establishment sort of common thread between Bernie and MAGA guys, just sort of a similar diagnosis, but a different prescription for how to manage it. And I think, unfortunately, that sort of commonality right now has been squashed. whether it's been squashed naturally or because they've isolated us into our social media silos and don't allow cross, pollination. They don't allow collaboration, because you're right, they do identify these nodes, and then they sort of put a barrier, a silent, invisible barrier up. So when people say you're in a sound chamber, an echo chamber, sometimes you're in one because of your own choice, but sometimes you're in one because it's outside of your control, because you're just put there. And so the stuff that's scary is overt, but there's also covert actions. I was going to ask you if there's humans doing the technology, or if it's the tech that they created doing the censorship. It's clearly both humans. It's both humans and the technology that they created. I mean, there are instances in which there are people manually altering things, manually closing down accounts, manually disconnecting people from each other. What examples do you have of just, individual human behavior, people being like, I'm going to change this, I'm going to stop this, I'm going to silence these people? Are there, you can't even call them rogue, right? Because they have the support of the companies. But, is this like a handful of people doing this? Are there people who are actively, I'm going to like pull this switch and unfollow you from that guy, which happens to me all the time? My good friends are unfollowed from me, people that would never unfollow me ever in a million years. They wake up one day and they're not following me anymore on Twitter. Is there some human element where they're literally picking and choosing and doing things like that?
Well, in the chapter on Facebook, in the book called "Deleted: Big Tech's Battle to Erase the Trump Movement and Steal the Election," you'll find a discussion of the hate agents list, which we leaked to Breitbart News in part back in 2019. And the hate agents list is exactly as you described, a manually curated list of controversial people that Facebook considers controversial, high-profile political individuals that Facebook is monitoring for potential hate speech. And the people who are on that list, Laura Loomer, Paul Joseph Watson, eventually banned from the platform, both of them. Candace Owens was on the list for future monitoring. But there were a couple of left wingers on the list. Linda Sarsour was on the list as well. Interestingly, Facebook included, they had little notes next to each name with items that might be regarded as hateful. First of all, this is quite scary. This is chilling. They weren't just monitoring actions and statements that were made on Facebook, but they were also monitoring what people were doing off Facebook. So one of the things next to Paul Joseph Watson's name was the fact that he interviewed Tommy Robinson, who Facebook considers a hate figure, on his YouTube account. YouTube isn't owned by Facebook. They were monitoring an Australian senator, Fraser Anning, and one of the items next to his name was the fact that he attended a rally where certain far-right individuals were also present. And in Linda Sarsour's case, they noted that off the platform, she defended the Palestinian terrorist Razmea Odeh, but Facebook said that shouldn't be logged as a hate signal. So, I mean, it's like Paul Joseph Watson gets in trouble for interviewing someone, but they let Sarsour off the hook for actually praising a 1970s terrorist. So the double standards are clearly there, but it's interesting that they're monitoring both sides of the aisle. They're monitoring anti-establishment left and anti-establishment right. I can certainly see a scenario in which you see a big movement in favor of a war, like we saw with the Iraq War. We have the mainstream media on one side and the anti-establishment left on the other side, where the focus shifts to censoring the anti-establishment left. I could totally see that happening, especially when you have the foreign policy establishment, the Atlantic Council, so deeply embedded with Facebook, with these tech giants.
Yeah, that does give some credence to the argument. At first they came for the Milos and you said nothing, and now all of a sudden you're just done, right? It's like we have to stand up for these principles because we all actually deserve these principles. And I would, for one, support anybody having a voice out there, if only so that they can be so obviously discredited. We can attack them, we can shout them down with the better ideas. But if we rely on pulling the trigger, silencing people, basically beheading them behind closed doors and black ops and black op camps, algorithms, then they're gonna come for you one day. They're gonna come for me. They're gonna come for, your mom one day.
They're going to have the New York Post newspaper founded by Alexander Hamilton, as they did last week.
Right. That to me is just mind-boggling. I mean, and even as that story evolves and no one denies the Hunter Biden emails, no one denies the Hunter Biden crack or meth pipe or whatever picture that he had. No one denies any of this stuff. They just start to say, oh, well, we don't like where it came from, or, it's not, it was planted by the Russians. Yeah, right. Come on with that. You would think they would get tired of that story, or at least come up with a better one at this point. But you're right. New York Post remains in quarantine or blacklisted or whatever, simply for posting a file of an article that they sourced, that they fact checked, with original documents that have not been discredited and have also been verified to some degree. This is a prime example of actually just the truth, or at least something worth debating as the truth, or something worth investigating as the truth, completely squashed. But ironically, or unexpectedly, I never know when to use the word irony anymore. So unexpectedly, it's sort of that George Lakoff notion of don't think of the elephant. Basically, Twitter and Facebook were like, don't think of the Hunter Biden photos. And that's what everybody wanted to talk about and think about. So that's a fascinating example of what happens when they do it overtly. It draws attention to it. But when they do it covertly, you don't even know it. It's like the end of Sopranos. You're just having lunch at the diner with your family, and all of a sudden everything goes silent. You don't know. Maybe you're still talking, but you're dead. You're dead. You don't even know it. What are some of the scarier overt things that you've seen? I did some work before with the news organization that we all know that does investigative work, where I did some background information on Dr. Epstein, and I was looking at his work and his analysis of Google search results and his analysis of the predictive text that they give you in the search bar. And the things that he uncovered there were terrifying. The way that they feed you suggestions based on what they want you to think, and they hide suggestions based on what they don't want you to think. They flash things up in front of your eyes for a brief second and then take it down using subliminal messaging to persuade you and coerce you. What are some of the scariest overt things that you have seen? And maybe if there's any way that we can be more aware of them so that we can identify them, because that to me is the scariest part. It's the silent killer.
What I would recommend everyone do is whenever there's like a big controversial news story in the news, you can test this yourself. Try comparing different search results. Try comparing Google to Bing and Yahoo and DuckDuckGo. Try seeing how often a Breitbart news link will appear on those other search engines versus Google. We certainly saw this with Black Lives Matter recently. We did a story at Breitbart. The search suggestions for Black Lives Matter on Google were completely sanitized, no negative suggestions at all. On the other search engines, they reflected what people were searching for. So is Black Lives Matter Marxist? Is Black Lives Matter a terrorist organization? As well as some other more positive suggestions as well. So it was a mix of both. On Google, completely sanitized. And I'm convinced they do this with almost anything. Actually, one of the things I want to do after this podcast is have a look for the search suggestions on Hunter Biden. That'll be an interesting one to look into. Oh, by the way, on that point, you mentioned how the response to the Hunter Biden story was so blatant and so obvious. My favorite one was Snopes, this left-wing fact checker. They fact checked the picture of Hunter Biden in bed with his meth pipe, and the fact check is the picture is rated false because with a big red false marker saying people are saying this is a picture of Hunter Biden in bed with a crack pipe. It's actually a meth pipe. And I got to check into that to see if it's real. I wouldn't be surprised if someone just did that as a parody. But if it's real, it's so hilarious.
Well, it's believable, which means
believable.
the critique hits home. That's for sure.
But as you said, that actually ended up amplifying the story. I think there was a study out today showing that people shared the New York Post story twice as much on these platforms after the censorship than before. But worth keeping in mind, that doesn't happen to everyone. When the smaller accounts get censored, when the accounts that don't have links to conservative media get censored, oftentimes people just don't find out about it ever. That's really important. There was an account just the other day, an account with I think 900,000 followers, just an account run by MAGA supporting mom, I think in the Midwest or somewhere like that. 900,000 followers. Should build it over a period of 10 years and suddenly taken away because too pro-Trump, I imagine. So many times it happens to people in the grassroots and no one finds out about it because not as big as the New York Post, not as big of a deal, but it happens every day to so many people.
Yeah, I mean, there's different strategies for different people who have different goals and intents out of social media. If you're just an individual citizen and you're using your real name, I really strongly advise you to just sort of just read and just don't stick your head out on the chopping block, because they're going to come for you, or they're going to silence you or quarantine you or wall you off from the rest of the world. Or in worst case scenario, somebody out there is going to pick up on something you said and use it to silence you and get you canceled like they did to me. But if you're a social media professional, the only real strategy that makes any sense is just to be on as many platforms as you possibly can, and then to also build your own internal email lists and your own internal contacts and databases and own networks, like we've done with the liminal order. We've built our own private network off of social media that cannot be canceled, cannot be silenced. We're connected in multiple different ways. There's no way to cut us off. So we now have 300 guys. We're probably gonna have 1,000 guys by the end of next year, and we will not be silenced and we will not be cut off from the rest of the world. But that is a real fear for people. And I gotta tell you, here I am building up a YouTube channel, and I still wonder every day if it's just going to get, dragged out from underneath my feet. So I have to just keep pushing things on all different platforms. One of the other things that you talked about in the book, which I found to be really terrifying, is the financial blacklist, because this goes beyond just, hey, you don't have access to social media. Big whoop, you can't post a tweet about your cats. Who cares about that? That's not a big deal. But let's talk about what happens when you can't even access the financial system. Also, keep in mind that there is a continued push and effort to move us away from cash transactions and exclusively into electronic transactions that all run on the back of the Visa and MasterCard and whatever network. So talk to me about the financial blacklist, because this social media stuff is just one element of the way that people are being censored, controlled, and deleted by big tech. It's not just, I love how the title isn't social media companies or Twitter or YouTube. No, it's big tech. It's tech in every element of your life. And so this is a different angle to that. Tell us about the scary part of financial blacklisting.
So e-commerce and online fundraising was another thing about big tech that was very threatening to the establishment. It was why Ron Paul was able to be so successful in 2008 and 2012. Totally outraised his establishment opponents just by mainly by using the internet. But this is being shut down as well. GoFundMe banning conservative fundraising campaigns. I believe they shut down. It was one of the crowdfunding platforms that shut down a fundraiser for Kyle Rittenhouse's legal fund, but they let the one for the guy Doloff who shot a conservative activist in Denver. They allowed that one to stay up. So again, you see the double standards. Patreon as well kicked off so many people. Kicked off Lauren Southern. Kicked off Sargon of Akkad. You can't use that anymore. But also it goes further. The credit card companies, Visa, MasterCard, Gab still has no access to, I believe they still have no access to credit card transactions. Happened to a few other people too. David Horowitz, Robert, who's the other guy? The two big Islam critics, there's David Horowitz and there's Robert Spencer. So yeah, again, they got cut off by the credit card systems as well. I think Horowitz eventually got it back. But again, there's no law stopping them from doing this. They can pull services for any reason. And this didn't used to be a problem, because why on earth would a credit card company cut you off for your political opinions? But now it's becoming a distinct possibility. We have now left-wing pressure groups operating today, putting ceaseless pressure on MasterCard, on Visa, on the entire financial sector to start denying service to people for political reasons. That's something they want. It's something they're pushing for. They haven't really got it yet, to the extent that they've got it with the tech companies, with the tech fundraising platforms like Patreon and GoFundMe. And institutions like Chase Bank strongly deny ever censoring people politically, even though some people say that's what they're doing. leader of the Proud Boys, I think, said his Chase bank account was cut off. A few other people said so as well. Chase denies it. The other financial institutions are pushing back a little, but they haven't made some of the moves that these left-wing activist organizations have demanded they've made, like establish a so-called Human Rights Council at MasterCard to monitor the people who use their services and cut them off if needed. They haven't done that yet, but it's what they want. It's what they're pushing for, and that is truly terrifying, because that will control everyone's entire livelihood. As you say, we're moving away from the cash economy to a entirely digital economy. The only one glimmer of hope recently is the Coinbase CEO, who recently came out and said, well, we're not going to be a political company, we're not going to do virtue signaling. I don't think he used that word exactly, but basically said, we're just going to do financial transactions, crypto coin transactions, that's all we do. We're not getting involved in politics. And immediately 40 or 50 social justice warriors at the company immediately resigned, which is great, by the way. That's a huge win for Coinbase in my view. So that's a glimmer of hope there, the crypto economy.
Yeah.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Financial censorship is real and growing.
It is terrifying. It is another sort of tightening of the noose around people that have different opinions and different political views. And again, I want to bring this back to the core. 50, 100 years ago, there was not the motivation to behave like this, because our political differences were not seen as moral failings and moral differences separated by religious-like belief systems that paints the other person as evil and subhuman and not worthy of the rights that we all have in the United States. And so because we have the moral compass of intersectionality, critical race theory, radical feminism, or even just regular old feminism driving these issues and driving the algorithms, they've captured the C-level executives, they've captured all of the incoming entry-level people, because they're all coming out of college understanding and believing that everybody who opposes them or doesn't believe in rape culture, or doesn't believe that every girl on campus is sexually assaulted, or doesn't believe that women get paid less than men for the same exact work with the same exact qualifications, that anyone that doesn't believe any of this stuff is an evil, horrible person, doesn't even deserve to communicate, to commune, to have news, to have financial services. And so it's basically exile. This is an internal exile, and it's being driven by this moral underpinning, intersectionality, critical race theory. So it becomes this tech solution. We can band-aid it up, we can regulate it in the right ways, we can file lawsuits and do antitrust and whatnot. But until the ideology is dead, until this good versus evil thing is finished, until they stop thinking honestly in their hearts that we're all Hitlers, they're going to continue to find ways to try to delete us, silence us, squash us. And if they can't do that, what else do? They have proactive measures too, right? There's sort of like a whole defamation posse out there. There's you call it the defamation engine. If they can't just cut you off, then they're going to start smearing you. Like, tell me about that, because that's a proactive measure that is seemingly very disgusting to me.
Destroying people's reputation. This is the again, one of the scariest chapters in the book that I wrote. If you want to find the book, by the way, it's at deletedbook.com. There are a number of places you can buy it from: Barnes & Noble, Amazon, all major retailers. But the defamation engine, this is the way that, the first half of the book discusses how big tech was a massive boost for freedom. Well, not big tech, but the internet in general was a massive boost for freedom. Generally a good thing that they then tried to take away after the election. But one way in which even the original internet was not particularly good for freedom, even the uncensored internet, was because it empowered cancel culture. It almost created cancel culture. Because before the internet, when there was like a scandal about someone, first of all, scandals usually only affected celebrities and politicians who spend their entire careers preparing for it. Second of all, it's on the news for a day or two, it's in the newspapers for a day or two, then, the newspaper gets thrown away, the cable anchor moves on to a different topic. So scandals did not last for eternity. But in the online era, That's completely flipped on its head. First of all, it affects everyone, not just celebrities. Anyone can get cancelled. Anyone can be written about in a blog or talked about in a YouTube video, whether you're prepared for it or not, whether you're a public figure or not. This has happened to so many people. And it's not limited by time. People don't just forget about it because it's then on your Google search history forever. It's a permanent scarlet letter. And Google empowers this by empowering Wikipedia. Wikipedia, I think, is the platform that least deserves Section 230 protections because it's not just a publisher, but the most powerful publisher in the world. Has more power to smear someone's reputation, more power to smear an organization's reputation than any other company, because Wikipedia results are always at the top of Google. Almost every search, you'll find them right up there. They've smeared so many people. They've smeared Breitbart News. They smeared Trump, Mark Levin, Sean Hannity, and anyone you can think of on the right, because Wikipedia is controlled by a tight circle of far left editors. But to go back to the way the media operates today, there's no time limit to the media. There's no morning edition and evening edition of the newspaper. It's 24/7. There's limitless space on the internet. There's a need to publish more and more material. So you've got so many journalists now are simply dedicated to ruining the reputations of their political opponents. That's how they get clicks. That's how they make their living. It's really disgraceful, actually. I can't imagine people who'd make their living doing that. But it's so powerful now because it stays on your Google results forever. It goes into Wikipedia. Wikipedia determines who's going to be an authoritative source. And the sources they decide are authoritative are sources like the Daily Beast, like the Washington Post, who increasingly thrive off of ruining people's reputation, of smearing people, like the Covington kids, like anyone you can think of. And the people challenging those narratives, Breitbart News, the Daily Caller, who might stick up with you and defend you if you get defamed, banned on Wikipedia. You can't use them as authoritative sources. So that's what I call the defamation engine in the book. It's the alliance of the media, the new media, the digital media, Wikipedia, and Google. That's such an important component of cancel culture. And we really got to take Section 230 away from Wikipedia. That site, more than any other tech giant, deserves to be sued for defamation.
I agree. And what you've described about this media environment where an article can get posted, then it gets reposted, then it gets cited, and these things take on a life of their own because and I've lived this. I know this firsthand experience. I got doxxed in 2018. I got smeared. I got called a Nazi, unjustifiably so, obviously. And what happened is that then you get people like Judd Legum, who was at Think Progress before, and they just turn out the worst kind of slander and the worst kind of activism, and then like 50 other repeater bloggers take that post, they quote it, they talk about it, then 1,000 other repeater bloggers just repeat those, and I called them chum bloggers, right? There's like blood in the water, so they just turn it up, they turn that chum up, and then all of a sudden one piece turns into 50 pieces, and then you type in your name, and all of a sudden the first 8 pages of your name search is all based on this one piece of crap lie put forth by an activist who doesn't care if you live or die, or your kids go hungry, or you can coach your son's little league game, or if it's right or wrong or whatever. And then all these psychopaths and sycophants pile on, and then they post 50 other things. Then all of a sudden your search is just overwhelmed. You're just completely overwhelmed. And so I experienced this reputation death, right? Like I used to work in education. I helped the poorest, least advantaged African-American kids in my city get better educations. I was a charter school turnaround expert. I dedicated my life to helping Black kids get better educations and closing the achievement gap. And one day an Antifa activist decides to call me a Nazi. Think Progress amplifies it. 1,000 chum bloggers repeat it. And now you search my name and it's just, Nazi, racist, hates kids. And that is just the end of it for me in education, because I'm an executive, I'm executive director, CEO level. So when somebody's going to hire me, at least they're going to do a cursory search on social media. They're going to Google my name. They're going to do some research. So forget about the fact that that news spread through my entire network instantaneously. Totally false information, that first mover advantage in people's brains. It was lodged in their heads. It's very difficult to dislodge afterwards. My reputation completely incinerated within 5 seconds. and there's nothing I can do about it. No matter how many times I publish things or say that I did, that wasn't me or what, it doesn't matter. It's as if my resume is written for me by somebody else and delivered to every possible employer before I get there. And on the resume, it says, don't hire me, I'm a Nazi. This is insanity. We have to figure out a way to fix this problem, because I am a lucky one. I took that energy, I turned it around into something positive, and now it's fueled me in my all of my media work, and I'm spreading the good message and having a positive impact on the world. But there are guys whose first name is the worst. The first name search is the worst thing they ever did by accident. They can't get a job. And then you find them dead in their car 2 years later, and their family hasn't heard from them for 6 months. This happens. It happens to people that don't have a voice and don't have a platform and aren't as fortunate as I am. So this is a matter of life and death. This isn't a matter of, oh, you want to have fun on the internet? No, this is life or death. Your entire professional career is at risk if you get slandered, repeated, and Google pasted for the rest of your life. There's no appeal process. There's no anybody to talk to about it. And even if you could reach them, they don't care. They don't care. And so this is a major issue. And I want people to understand it's not just corporations, not just big media players. It's not just websites like Breitbart. It's not even somebody like me who had the ability to turn it around. It's for everyday average Americans. If you want to talk to your friends, your family, get news information, conduct financial transactions, have a reputation. We live in an information world. In fact, what I said is we live in a story economy. And you have to tell your own story, because if you don't tell your own story, someone else is going to do it. And now they won't even let you tell your story, and they'll tell your story for you. So this is a very bleak scenario. Unfortunately, a lot of the topics I've covered lately haven't been super uplifting, and that's because we are looking into the precipice of something very awful. The long night when the algorithms take over, fueled and inspired by this, intersectionality that's taken over all of our institutions. And so yeah,
I will inject one glimmer of hope into the whole cancel culture thing. And by the way, I think there's a certain point. I didn't just do one chapter on it about the defamation. I did 2 chapters on it, because the second part of this is the what I call the worldwide honeypot.
Yeah.
So not only are our reputations at greater risk than ever before, as you say, not just big people, not celebrities, politicians, but everyone, every individual, but we're also incentivized by social media platforms to post everything about ourselves on social media, all our embarrassing college moments online forever. So at the very moment when this cancel culture is emerging, we're also being encouraged to have zero privacy and, expose all our personal lives, all our opinions, our craziest opinions, stupid jokes we might have made when we were younger. We're encouraged to post that all online to a global audience. So it's those both things. It's the defamation and the honeypot of social media, which encourages this, this culture of expression, but also compromises everyone in the process. But here's the glimmer of hope. Because there's so much of it now, because this cancel culture industry has grown to such an extraordinary degree, I've noticed it's starting to have diminishing returns. I mean, how many people have they tried to cancel over the past year and just completely failed? They've done these massive stories about people like Jack Posobiec, Michelle Malkin. There was a documentary right now by some random dude I never heard about at the Atlantic. No one paid attention to it. And that guy spent years pretending to be friends with right-wingers, worming his way into their circles to get all these stories. Years working with this, no one's paying attention to it.
That bastard Daniel, I know who he was.
Let's not even amplify him. Let's not say his name. But yeah. It's a failure. No one's paying attention to it. They tried to cancel Peter Thiel. No one paid attention to that either. There was a massive BuzzFeed story about him palling around with so-called white nationalists. No one cared. Jack Posobiec, again, he's retweeted by the president to this day. No one cared when they tried to cancel her. Michelle Malkin, they tried to cancel her. Even establishment conservatives tried to cancel her. She got a gig at Newsmax a few weeks after that, so that didn't work either. So the glimmer of hope is that there's so much of this now. People are just so sick of it. They don't care. You call people Nazis, you call people racist, you call people white supremacists. No one's paying attention. They just assume it's all bullshit, which 99% of it is.
Yeah, indeed. This is a phenomenon that I first read about with Jordan Hall and John Robb talking about the Blue Church and their, sort of scorched earth policy of calling everyone racist, Nazi, bigoted, whatever. And eventually you use that term enough, you kill enough people that all that are remaining are people who are resistant to the kind of name calling, who are resistant, have a antibiotic resistance almost to that kind of name calling. We're inoculated. We can't be impacted. And so you're left with people that are actually really quite strong, and left with people who are resistant to that kind of stuff. I know in 2018, I was at that time, what I call like a civilian. I wasn't a public figure. And I got destroyed. But I have seen a trend change, and like you said, in which people are taking that less seriously. And sometimes I wonder if I'm like the last casualty in Vietnam. I mean, I don't want to see it happen to anybody else, of course, but they did really destroy my life, and I'm glad to see a little bit of hope there, whereas people are just starting to take it less seriously and totally discount it. Now, my last question to you as we try to wrap this up here, and the book again is Deleted: Big Tech's Battle to Erase the Trump Movement and Steal the Election. You can get it right now on Amazon. You can get it at Barnes & Noble. You can get it at other places. Also, follow Alam here at Libertarian Blue on Twitter. Make sure you follow him there and get the book, because he goes into much greater detail on all this, and in a great format. He's a tremendous writer. The last question here is, what are we going to do? What do we do? What do we do as citizens? What do we do as a government? What do we do as political players? What do we do as customers of these social media? Or are we the customers, or are we the products? What do we do as the products of these social media companies? Like, how do we handle this? What do we do over the next couple of years, Alan?
First of all, stop using Google immediately. There's no reason to use Google over the other search engines. Second of all, while I wouldn't recommend removing yourself from Facebook or Twitter or YouTube, because then you're essentially self-censoring yourself, you should also, as you say, have presences on all the other smaller platforms as well. BitChute, Parler, Gab, all of these platforms. On a political level, the real danger of social media manipulation is what they're doing to undecided voters. We kind of have a sense that we're being propagandized as, conservatives or free speech defenders on social media, but we have no idea what they're showing to undecided voters. It's probably all propaganda. So make sure around election season, talk to undecided voters. Don't just devote all your energies to social media. Actually talk to people in real life, get the message out there, at least until big tech is brought under control. As to bringing them under control, we got to push for one thing only. I think this is the most easy fix you can do, the simplest legislative fix. Some people are talking about, establish a huge bureaucracy to make sure they stay, these platforms stay neutral. I think what you got to do is say, if you want Section 230 protections, the definition of being a platform is that you don't moderate content, you don't filter content that's legal, that's constitutionally protected on behalf of your users. You can create tools to filter certain types of content, but you have to give users the option, and you have to prove that they opted into that, they chose to be subject to those filters. That's critical. That's what we need to push for. And Republicans especially, but whoever your representative is, has to know that if you're taking money from big tech, that's just completely unacceptable. Just primary those fuckers. It needs to be as unacceptable, or more unacceptable, frankly, than taking money from Planned Parenthood would be to a social conservative. That's how unacceptable it should be. Lastly, it's really the executive branch. The presidential election could not be more important. Because the executive branch, as far as I can tell, is the only branch of the government that's actually serious about tackling the problem at the moment. It's the DOJ that's just filed an antitrust case against Google. It's the FCC chairman now talking about looking at changes to Section 230. So really, this particular election is huge. Get involved in that, whatever you do, because this is, do we want digital totalitarianism, or do we want a executive branch that will actually try and bring these tech giants under control? That is absolutely critical. So that's what I'd say.
We are on the edge of digital totalitarianism. The long night approaches if we don't do something about it now. I can't stress enough how the first mover advantage here is going to be critical. If the political powers are aligned with the corporate tech powers and the algorithms and the financial companies and Wikipedia, and they decide that it's over for all of us, and they create their own social credit score that's not just hidden beneath the algorithms, but is even more upfront and obvious, we all are in for a very long struggle. Just ask the people of Hong Kong, the pro-democracy people in Hong Kong, what it's like now to be under the heel of the Chinese totalitarian credit scoring system, their use of big tech, facial recognition, travel limitations, etc. Black Mirror is coming. I wish I were exaggerating. I wish I were being Alex Jones tinfoil hat here, but I'm not. It's all right in front of us. The facts are clear as day. The trend is clear and flowing unabated. We have to do something. Alum, you're working on that. You have put out a fantastic book. It's called Deleted. Big tech, not just social media, mind you guys, big tech's battle to erase the Trump movement and steal the election. And you know what? It's not even just the Trump movement. It's to silence all of us, anyone that dissents from the intersectionality critical race theory perspective, which is a lot of people. It is a lot of people. And if we're going to, avoid the tyranny of the minority here, we have to do something. So get out and vote. Drag a friend to vote with you coming up on November 3rd. Drag three friends, and make it happen. Alam, it's a pleasure to speak with you as always. The senior tech correspondent from Breitbart News. Follow him on Twitter as long as they'll have him at Libertarian Blue. Get the book. It's called Deleted. Thank you so much, buddy. I really appreciate it. And let's touch base again after the election.
Thanks, Jack. This was awesome.
All right. My pleasure. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.